The surveillance cameras from the Riverside Grand Hotel would later show exactly what happened on the evening of May 17, 2023, at 7:42 p.m. A group of well-dressed black teenagers in tuxedos and evening gowns walked through the hotel lobby, laughing and taking photos. They were students from Lincoln Preparatory Academy, arriving for their junior prom in a ballroom their parents had booked and paid for 6 months earlier. Security Director Marcus Webb spotted them from across the marble lobby, and something in his expression changed. He started walking toward the group with purpose, his hand already moving to his radio. His jaw was tight, his shoulders squared, and he looked at those teenagers like he had already decided they didn't belong there. What Webb didn't know was that he had just made the worst mistake of his entire career. One decision that would destroy his reputation, cost the hotel $8.4 million in damages, and expose a pattern of discrimination that had been happening for years. The cameras were rolling, multiple phones were recording, and Marcus Webb was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if this is your first time here, please hit that subscribe button. This story gets even more intense, and you won't want to miss what happens next. The students walking into that hotel that night represented some of the brightest young people in the state. Lincoln Preparatory Academy wasn't just any high school, it was a magnet school with a 98% college acceptance rate. These were national merit scholars, debate champions, student government leaders, and honor roll students. They had earned their way into one of the most competitive schools in the region through rigorous entrance exams and competitive admissions. The junior class had a combined GPA of 3.87. 12 students had already received early college acceptances to Ivy League schools. 23 were AP scholars. The school's robotics team had won the state championship that year. Their Model UN delegation had placed second at nationals. These weren't just good students. They were exceptional young people with bright futures ahead of them. Among them was 17-year-old Darius Thompson, straight-A student, captain of the debate team, already accepted to Georgetown University with a full academic scholarship to study political science. He was the kind of young man who helped elderly neighbors with their groceries and volunteered at a food bank every Saturday morning. He tutored younger students after school 3 days a week. Nothing about him screamed confrontation or trouble. He was exactly what every parent hoped their child would become. His date that night was Maya Chen, valedictorian of the junior class, Intel Science Fair finalist, and already committed to MIT for engineering. The couple had been planning this night for months, coordinating their outfits, arranging transportation, and looking forward to one perfect evening with their friends. His father, James Thompson, had dropped him off at the hotel 20 minutes earlier. James was a 23-year veteran of the FBI, currently serving as the deputy director of the criminal division. Before that, he spent 15 years as a field agent, working organized crime, public corruption, and civil rights violations. He had testified before Congress. He had taken down mob bosses and dirty politicians. He knew the law inside and out. He knew his rights better than most lawyers, and he definitely knew when someone was violating those rights. That evening, Darius and his classmates had one simple goal: celebrate 4 years of hard work with their junior prom. The school had selected the Riverside Grand Hotel because of its elegant ballroom and professional reputation. Parents had paid $15,000 to rent the space, hire caterers, and cover all associated costs. Everything was documented, everything was legal, everything was paid for in full. Simple, normal, forgettable, just teenagers going to prom. Marcus Webb approached the group near the hotel's main staircase. He didn't introduce himself professionally or explain why he was there. Instead, he positioned himself directly in their path and stated that the event was for hotel guests only and they needed to leave immediately. Darius, who was standing near the front of the group, pulled out his phone and showed Webb the confirmation email. The reservation was under the name of Mrs. Patricia Jenkins, one of the parent chaperones who was already in the ballroom with the catering staff. The email clearly stated that the Riverside Grand Hotel had confirmed the rental of the Crystal Ballroom for May 17, 2023, from 7 o'clock p.m. to midnight for the Lincoln Preparatory Academy Junior Prom. Webb barely looked at the screen. He said he didn't care what the email said and that they needed to vacate the premises immediately. His hand was resting on his belt near his radio, his voice clipped and cold, standing way too close to the teenagers in a way that felt deliberately intimidating. Around them in the lobby, other people walked by freely. A group of white college students in jeans and hoodies were hanging out near the elevators, talking loudly and taking selfies, and nobody was asking them if they were guests. An elderly white couple with shopping bags passed through the lobby without being questioned about whether they had permission to be there. A family with 3 young children in casual clothes walked toward the restaurant, and nobody stopped them to verify they had a reservation. In fact, just 5 minutes earlier, a group of middle-aged white men in polo shirts and khakis had walked through that same lobby carrying cases of beer toward one of the conference rooms. Webb had seen them. He had walked right past them without saying a word. No questions about whether they were guests, no demands to see confirmation emails, no interrogation about what event they were attending. But these black teenagers in formal wear, carrying corsages and boutonnieres, arriving for a paid event with confirmed reservations, they were the ones who needed to be stopped and questioned. Darius noticed this. He had trained himself to notice everything. It was how he survived being a young black man in spaces where people made assumptions about him before he ever opened his mouth. He had learned by age 12 to carry his school ID at all times. He had learned to speak clearly and formally when addressing authority figures. He had learned to document everything. These were survival skills his parents had taught him, lessons that white teenagers never had to learn. Then Webb asked the question that told Darius and his classmates everything they needed to know about why they were being stopped. He asked if they had permission to be in the hotel. The assumption hung in the air like an accusation. The implication was crystal clear and absolutely disgusting. These well-dressed, polite teenagers didn't look like they belonged in this upscale hotel, at least not to Marcus Webb. Darius stayed calm. He explained again that they had a reservation for the ballroom and that the adult chaperones were already upstairs setting up. He offered to call Mrs. Jenkins to come down and verify everything. Webb refused. He said that was unnecessary and repeated his demand that they leave. His voice was getting louder now, and other guests in the lobby were starting to stare. Some stopped walking to watch what was happening. This was becoming a public scene. One of Darius's classmates, a girl named Jasmine Whitaker, started recording on her phone. The moment that camera came out, Webb's entire demeanor shifted. He stepped closer to her, invading her personal space, and demanded she stop recording immediately. Jasmine calmly stated that she had the right to record a security officer performing their duties in a public space. Her voice didn't waver. She kept the camera steady, making sure it captured both Webb's face and the group of students. Quick question for you. Have you or someone you know ever been accused of not belonging somewhere? Type yes if you have. Webb got on his radio and called for backup. What he told his colleagues was completely false. He reported a group of unauthorized individuals refusing to leave the property and becoming aggressive with staff. Anyone watching the surveillance footage or the phone recordings could see that this was a lie. The students had been nothing but calm and polite from the very first moment. 2 more security officers arrived within minutes. David Chen and Angela Martinez pulled up, neither one aware of what kind of disaster they were walking into. Webb immediately gave them his version of events, painting the students as trespassers who were being confrontational and disruptive. But when Chen looked at the scene, something didn't add up. These were teenagers in formal wear, prom dresses and tuxedos, holding corsages and boutonnieres. They weren't yelling or causing trouble. They were standing there quietly while Webb berated them. Angela Martinez was experienced enough to spot the problem immediately. She asked Webb the obvious question. Had he verified the reservation? Had he called the front desk? Had he actually confirmed whether these students were supposed to be here? Webb brushed off the question and insisted they follow his lead. That answer did not satisfy Martinez at all. Darius looked directly at Martinez and explained the entire situation. He gave her Mrs. Jenkins's name and phone number. He showed her the confirmation email again. He offered to provide the credit card receipt showing the $15,000 payment. His tone was professional and precise. This was clearly a young man who understood how to handle himself in difficult situations. Martinez glanced at Chen. The look they exchanged said everything. They both knew this stop had gone completely wrong and that Webb had created a problem where none existed. But Webb made his next catastrophic decision before either of them could intervene. He announced that if the students didn't leave immediately, they would be arrested for trespassing. This was Webb's second massive mistake, and the consequences were already piling up. By now, a crowd had gathered in the lobby. Hotel guests were watching from the balcony overlooking the entrance. More phones came out to record. Someone posted the scene live on Instagram, and within minutes, hundreds of people were watching in real time. The students stood together in a group, some of them visibly shaken. Several of the girls were crying, their carefully applied makeup running down their faces. These were teenagers who had spent hours getting ready for what was supposed to be one of the best nights of their high school careers. They had bought dresses and rented tuxedos. They had gotten their hair done professionally. They had saved money from part-time jobs to afford tickets and transportation. 16-year-old Amara Johnson stood with her arms wrapped around herself, trying not to cry. She had been so excited about this prom. She had found the perfect emerald green dress that matched her eyes. Her grandmother had helped her with her hair, creating an elaborate updo with delicate braids. Now she felt humiliated, standing in this hotel lobby being treated like a criminal while strangers stared and recorded. Her date, Trevor Williams, kept his arm around her shoulders, trying to be strong even though he was furious. He was the student body president, a young man who prided himself on staying calm under pressure. But this was different. This wasn't a difficult test or a challenging debate. This was being told he didn't belong somewhere he had every right to be simply because of the color of his skin. The younger students looked terrified. Some had never experienced overt racism before. Lincoln Prep had been their protective bubble, a place where they were valued and celebrated for their intelligence and achievements. This was their first real encounter with someone who looked at them and saw a threat instead of the accomplished young people they were. Mrs. Jenkins heard the commotion from upstairs and came rushing down with two other parent chaperones. She was a 52-year-old elementary school principal who had organized this prom for months. She had every document imaginable in a 3-ring binder that she carried specifically for situations like this. She showed all of this to Webb piece by piece. The signed contract dated November 12, 2022, with the hotel's official seal and the signature of their events director. The payment receipts showing 3 installments totaling $15,000, all fully paid by March 2023. The certificate of liability insurance that the hotel had required, purchased specifically for this event. The email correspondence spanning 6 months with the hotel's event coordinator, including a message from just 3 days earlier confirming the final head count and menu selections. She had photographs of the ballroom setup from their walkthrough 2 weeks prior. She had the hotel's own floor plan showing the Crystal Ballroom reserved for Lincoln Preparatory Academy Junior Prom on May 17, 2023. She had text messages from the catering manager confirming the delivery time for dinner service. She had everything. Mrs. Jenkins had been a school administrator for 28 years. She had organized hundreds of school events. She knew that when you're a black woman planning an event for black children, you document everything twice. You keep every receipt, you save every email, you arrive early, you follow every rule to the letter, because you know that at any moment someone might question whether you have a right to be there. She had learned this lesson over decades of navigating predominantly white spaces, and her preparation that night would prove invaluable. She explained to Webb that she had been upstairs in the Crystal Ballroom for the past hour with the hotel's own catering staff, who had let her in with their keys. The DJ was already setting up his equipment. The decorations were hung. The centerpieces were arranged on every table. The photo backdrop was assembled. Everything was exactly as the hotel had agreed to provide 6 months earlier when they signed the contract and accepted the payment. Webb barely looked at the paperwork. He insisted that there must have been some mistake and that the event needed to be shut down until management could sort it out. But it was 8:15 p.m. on a Saturday night. The hotel's general manager had gone home for the evening. The assistant manager on duty was handling a situation in the restaurant. Webb was making decisions without any authorization, and he was making them based on nothing but his own assumptions about who these black teenagers were and whether they belonged in his hotel. Do you think body cameras for security guards would make a difference? Let us know your thoughts. Martinez had seen enough. She pulled Webb aside and quietly suggested they verify the reservation through the hotel's computer system immediately. She told him this was clearly a legitimate event and that continuing to harass these families would be a disaster. Webb refused, insisting he was in charge of hotel security and that they needed to follow his lead. This created a clear split among the security team. Martinez wanted no part of what was obviously becoming a lawsuit. Chen was newer and less certain, but even he could see the warning signs everywhere. Parents started arriving to drop off more students. When they saw their children being detained in the lobby by security guards, they demanded to know what was happening. Some recognized the pattern immediately. Their kids were being profiled. They were being treated like criminals for showing up to an event they had paid thousands of dollars to attend. Dr. Vanessa Mitchell, a cardiac surgeon, arrived to drop off her daughter and found her standing in the lobby in tears, her carefully styled hair and makeup ruined from crying. Dr. Mitchell had specifically chosen the Riverside Grand because of its reputation. She had paid $1,200 for her daughter's dress. She had booked a professional photographer. She had spent hours helping her daughter get ready for what was supposed to be a magical night. Now her 16-year-old was being publicly humiliated by a security guard who had decided she didn't belong. Attorney Marcus Williams pulled up with his son and immediately recognized what was happening. As a civil rights lawyer, he had seen this pattern dozens of times. He started taking notes on his phone, documenting every detail, the time, the specific accusations Webb was making, the number of students being detained, the fact that white guests were walking through the lobby unquestioned. One father, Dr. Malcolm Reed, a renowned orthopedic surgeon who had performed over 5,000 successful surgeries, started taking photos of Webb's security badge and name tag. He documented everything: the time, the accusations, the lack of verification, the crowd of witnesses. He asked Webb directly why white guests weren't being questioned. Webb didn't answer. Dr. Reed asked again, louder this time, making sure everyone in the lobby could hear the question. Webb still didn't answer because there was no answer he could give that wouldn't expose exactly what he was doing. At 8:47 p.m., Darius's father James arrived at the hotel. He had received a frantic call from his son explaining that security was trying to shut down the prom. James walked into the lobby in a dark suit and tie, carrying himself with the quiet authority of someone who had spent decades in federal law enforcement. He identified himself to Webb as Deputy Director James Thompson of the FBI. He showed his credentials slowly and deliberately, making sure Webb could see every detail of the official badge and identification card. He asked for an explanation of why his son and 60 other teenagers were being detained and harassed instead of enjoying their prom. All the color drained from Webb's face. His hand, which had been resting confidently on his belt, started to shake slightly. For a long moment, he just stood there as the reality of what he had done started to sink in. He had racially profiled the children of some of the most accomplished black professionals in the city: doctors, lawyers, executives, a federal agent. He had ignored a valid contract and reservation that had been paid in full 6 months ago. He had made false statements about the students being aggressive when every camera in that lobby had recorded them being nothing but polite. And all of it was recorded on hotel surveillance cameras, on multiple cell phones, and was currently being broadcast live to thousands of people on social media. James asked Webb a simple question. On what grounds are you detaining these students? His voice was calm, professional, but carried the weight of 2 decades spent interrogating criminals and corrupt officials. It was the kind of question that demanded a real answer, not excuses or deflection. Webb stammered something about unauthorized individuals and standard security protocols. James asked another question. Have you verified the reservation through your computer system? Webb admitted he had not. Have you spoken to the hotel's event coordinator who confirmed this booking? Webb had not done that either. Have you asked to see the signed contract that your hotel provided to these families? No. Then what specifically led you to believe these students were unauthorized to be here? Webb had no answer to that question, because the real answer, that he saw a group of black teenagers and assumed they were trespassing, was not something he could say out loud without confirming exactly what everyone already knew. His career was over, and somewhere in his mind Marcus Webb had to know it. But instead of immediately apologizing and trying to salvage the situation, Webb made it worse. He questioned whether James's FBI credentials were legitimate. He asked why an FBI agent's son would be at this particular hotel. He suggested that maybe the reservation had been obtained fraudulently. Every word out of his mouth just dug the hole deeper. James looked at Webb with the kind of calm that comes from dealing with actual criminals for 2 decades. He pulled out his phone and called the hotel's general manager at home. He explained the situation in precise, professional language. He informed the manager that his security director was currently preventing a contracted event from proceeding, had made false reports about the attendees, and was continuing to harass families despite being shown proof of their reservation. The general manager arrived at the hotel within 20 minutes, clearly upset and apologetic. He personally escorted the students and their chaperones to the ballroom. He ordered Webb to stand down immediately. He arranged for complimentary upgrades to the catering and brought in additional staff to ensure the prom went smoothly. But the damage was done. The videos were already viral. Within 30 seconds, the hotel's social media accounts were flooded with thousands of comments demanding accountability. The crowd of parents and witnesses had grown to over 40 people. Many were recording. All were watching a security director's career implode in real time. The videos hit the internet within minutes. Jasmine's recording was the first to go viral, posted to TikTok at 9:03 p.m. with a caption explaining that black students were being kicked out of their own prom despite having a valid reservation. The algorithm picked it up immediately. Within 1 hour, it had 5,000 views. By midnight, it had crossed 2 million views. By 6 a.m. the next morning, it had 8 million views and had been shared to Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. The hotel's official social media accounts were flooded. Their Instagram post from earlier that day promoting their elegant event spaces received over 15,000 comments, nearly all of them calling out the hotel for racism and demanding Webb's firing. Their Facebook page was hit with 2,400 one-star reviews in less than 12 hours. The hotel's marketing team tried to delete comments and reviews, which only made things worse. Screenshots of the deleted content spread across Twitter with accusations of cover-up. Hashtag Riverside Grand Racism trended nationally on Twitter for 3 straight days. Hashtag Prom, while Black became a rallying cry, with thousands of Black adults sharing their own stories of being profiled at formal events. Celebrities weighed in. Several prominent civil rights organizations issued statements. The NAACP called for a federal investigation into the hotel's practices. Local news stations in the city ran the story as their lead every evening for a week. National networks picked it up by day 2, CNN, MSNBC, and even Fox News covered it. By day 3, it was international news. The BBC ran a segment, Al Jazeera covered it. News outlets in France, Germany, and Japan reported on the incident as an example of ongoing racial discrimination in America. A group of well-dressed Black teenagers harassed and detained at their junior prom. An FBI deputy director having to intervene to get his son into an event his family had paid for. A security director with 27 documented complaints still employed and empowered to humiliate families. The optics couldn't have been worse for the Riverside Grand Hotel. Type accountability in the comments if you think Webb got exactly what he deserved. Webb's employment history came out quickly after that. Investigative journalists requested his personnel file through a public records request, since the hotel received tax incentives and was subject to certain transparency requirements. What they found was damning. Marcus Webb had worked at the Riverside Grand for 6 years. During that time, 27 formal complaints had been filed against him for discriminatory behavior. 27. Nearly all involved Black or Latino guests being questioned, detained, or asked to leave when white guests in similar situations were not approached. One complaint from 2021 involved the Henderson family celebrating their daughter's high school graduation party in one of the hotel's event spaces. Webb had approached Robert Henderson, a successful business owner, and demanded to see proof that they had permission to use the facility. This was despite the Henderson family having a signed contract for $8,000 worth of catering and room rental. Webb had made them wait in the lobby for 45 minutes while he verified their reservation, causing them to miss their scheduled dinner service. The food had gone cold, the celebration was ruined. The hotel had offered them a $500 gift certificate as an apology. Mr. Henderson had accepted it and moved on, not wanting to make waves. Another complaint from 2022 involved Gerald Thompson, a Black pharmaceutical executive who was staying at the hotel for a 3-day medical conference. Thompson was a platinum-level rewards member who had stayed at the hotel chain over 100 nights in the previous year. He had been stopped by Webb in the hallway and questioned about whether he was actually a guest. Despite wearing a conference badge and carrying a room key, Webb had demanded to see his ID and called the front desk to verify he had a reservation, all while Thompson stood in the hallway being stared at by other guests. Thompson had filed a formal complaint. The hotel had given him bonus points. Nothing happened to Webb. In 2020, Webb had stopped a Black woman named Patricia Owens who was attending her company's annual retreat in one of the hotel's conference rooms. He questioned why she was there and asked if she was part of the catering staff despite her wearing business attire identical to the white colleagues she was walking with. Patricia was actually the vice president of operations for a Fortune 500 company. Her white colleagues hadn't been questioned, only she had. The hotel had received warnings. The complaints had been documented. Webb had been counseled twice about his behavior, but no serious action was ever taken. The hotel prioritized avoiding conflict with a long-term employee over protecting guests from discrimination. That failure of leadership was about to cost everyone dearly. More families came forward after the prom incident went viral. Parents who had held events at the Riverside Grand shared their own stories of being treated with suspicion and hostility by Webb. A Black medical conference that had rented meeting spaces reported that Webb had repeatedly questioned whether attendees were legitimate guests. A quinceañera celebration was subjected to extra security scrutiny that no other event received. The stories went on, each one establishing an undeniable pattern of behavior that the hotel had ignored for years. James Thompson gave one interview to a national news outlet. He was measured and professional, exactly what you would expect from someone in his position. He explained that he didn't want to be the face of this story, but he felt obligated to speak out. If his son and his classmates could be treated this way despite having every legitimate right to be there, what happened to families who didn't have his resources or platform? He talked about the conversation he had with Darius that night after the prom. His son had handled the situation with remarkable maturity and dignity, but he shouldn't have had to. He was 17 years old, going to his junior prom, and he was forced to prove he had a right to exist in that space. The interview resonated because James didn't perform outrage or demand revenge. He simply explained what happened and why it mattered. He called for hotel chains to implement better training, meaningful oversight for security staff, and real consequences for employees who discriminate. His calm professionalism made the message even more powerful. 3 months after the incident, a lawsuit was filed on behalf of 65 students and their families who had been at the prom that night. The legal team included some of the top civil rights attorneys in the country. They reviewed every piece of evidence, the surveillance footage, the phone recordings, the Instagram live stream, the hotel's own emails confirming the reservation, and Webb's personnel file with all those documented complaints. The lawsuit charged the Riverside Grand Hotel with racial discrimination in violation of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, intentional infliction of emotional distress, breach of contract, negligent supervision of employees. The discrimination charge carried serious weight. This wasn't just about one employee having a bad day. This was a documented pattern of discriminatory behavior that hotel management had known about and failed to address. That transformed what might have been a simple service complaint into evidence of institutional racism. If you've made it this far, you're part of the solution. Subscribe and share this story so others can learn from it. The hotel's defense tried to argue that Webb had been following standard security protocols and had made an honest mistake in a confusing situation. That argument collapsed when the attorneys played the surveillance footage in court. The video showed dozens of other people walking through that lobby without being questioned. It showed Webb barely looking at the confirmation email Darius had shown him. It showed him escalating the situation even after being presented with multiple forms of proof that the event was legitimate. The defense tried to argue that the students had been confrontational and that Webb felt threatened. The jury watched video after video of calm, polite teenagers standing quietly while Webb berated them. That argument fell apart immediately. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of racial profiling on adolescents. Dr. Helen Martinez, a clinical psychologist who specialized in trauma, explained that experiences like this could affect academic performance, mental health, and long-term trust in institutions. She presented research showing that Black teenagers who experienced public racial humiliation showed increased rates of anxiety, depression, and post-traumatic stress symptoms. Several of the students gave emotional testimony about how the incident had affected them. Jasmine Whitaker, the girl who had recorded the crucial video evidence, testified that she now avoided hotels entirely and had panic attacks when her family tried to go on vacation. She had been a confident, outgoing student before that night. Now she second-guessed entering any predominantly white space. Marcus Thompson, Darius's younger brother who had been looking forward to his own prom the following year, testified that he no longer wanted to attend. The excitement and anticipation had been replaced with fear and anxiety about being humiliated in public. Maya Chen, the valedictorian who had been Darius's date, testified about missing the first 2 weeks of school the following year due to stress-related illness. Her grades had dropped for the first time in her academic career. She had nightmares about being surrounded by security guards. The parents testified about their own pain watching their children experience this. Dr. Vanessa Mitchell broke down on the stand describing her daughter's tears and how she had worked so hard to shield her children from racism, only to have them experience it so publicly and traumatically. These weren't abstract damages, these were real families whose children had been harmed in documented, measurable ways. The evidence was overwhelming, the pattern was undeniable, the harm was real and documented. The trial lasted 3 weeks, the jury deliberated for just under 6 hours, liable on all counts. The hotel's legal team sat in stunned silence as the verdict was read. They had underestimated how badly the case would play in front of a jury. They had assumed they could settle quietly or get charges dismissed. They were wrong. The damages award came 2 days later, $2.8 million in compensatory damages for the emotional distress, humiliation, and breach of contract experienced by the 65 students and families, $5.6 million in punitive damages designed to punish the hotel and deter future discrimination. Total, $8.4 million for one security director's prejudice and the hotel's years of failure to address his pattern of behavior. The jury sent a message. Discrimination has consequences, and institutions that enable it will pay. The Riverside Grand Hotel also settled separately with 3 other families who had filed individual complaints about Webb's behavior in prior years. Those settlements totaled an additional $1.3 million, though the terms included confidentiality agreements. Marcus Webb was fired within 48 hours of the incident before the lawsuit was even filed. The hotel released a statement calling his behavior completely unacceptable and contrary to our values. His security license was revoked by the state regulatory board, meaning he could never work in hotel security or any licensed security position in the state again. He was 54 years old and had spent 30 years in various security roles. Now he would have to find a new career and explain to every potential employer why his name was associated with one of the most high-profile discrimination cases of the year. His face had been on national news. His actions had been dissected by legal experts on cable television. A simple Google search of his name brought up pages of articles about the incident. He tried to find work in security at other venues. Every application was rejected. He applied for jobs in retail security, warehouse security, even as a night watchman at a storage facility. Nobody would hire him. His reputation preceded him everywhere he went. Employers saw his work history, recognized his name, and moved on to other candidates. He eventually found work at a construction site doing manual labor for $16 an hour, a fraction of the $72,000 salary he had been earning at the Riverside Grand. He lasted 3 months before his coworkers recognized him from the news coverage. The hostile work environment became unbearable, and he quit. His personal life suffered too. Friends distanced themselves. His marriage ended in divorce 6 months after the incident, with his ex-wife citing the stress and public humiliation as factors. His adult children gave interviews expressing shame and disappointment in their father's actions. These weren't things the families wished on him, but they were the natural consequences of his choices and his refusal to see black families as equally deserving of respect and service. The hotel itself faced massive financial consequences beyond the lawsuit. Corporate sponsors pulled contracts worth over $3 million. The American Medical Association canceled their annual conference that had been scheduled for the following year, a booking worth $4.2 million in room nights, catering, and event services. The National Association of Black Lawyers moved their convention to a competitor hotel. The state's largest tech company pulled their quarterly leadership retreats, which had been bringing $800,000 annually to the hotel. 3 major conferences canceled their bookings and chose other venues, costing the hotel an estimated $7 million in lost revenue over the next 2 years. The hotel's parent company saw its stock price drop 8% in the week following the verdict, wiping out $340 million in market capitalization. Shareholders filed lawsuits against the company's board of directors for failing to address the discrimination issues that led to the massive judgment. Within 18 months of the verdict, the Riverside Grand Hotel filed for bankruptcy protection. The property was sold to a new ownership group for $23 million less than its pre-incident valuation. Every employee lost their jobs during the restructuring. The hotel was rebranded under new management with a completely different name, desperate to escape the reputation damage. The general manager who had allowed Webb's behavior to continue for years was demoted and transferred to a property in another state where he was quietly forced out 6 months later. The director of human resources was fired for failing to address the pattern of complaints properly and never worked in HR again. The hotel's entire security department was dissolved and rebuilt from scratch with new hiring standards, mandatory bias training, and a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination complaints. The Riverside Grand was placed under a consent decree requiring independent monitoring of their employment practices for 5 years. They had to implement new anti-discrimination training for all staff, establish a civilian review board to evaluate complaints, hire an independent diversity consultant to review all policies and procedures, and submit quarterly reports to the court demonstrating compliance. Non-compliance would result in the hotel being held in contempt of court. James Thompson and Darius started a scholarship fund with a portion of their settlement money. The Thompson Family Scholarship provides full college tuition for students who have been affected by racial discrimination and are committed to civil rights work. In its first year, it awarded $5,000 to 20 students. By year 3, with additional donations from supporters who had seen the story, the fund had grown to $3.2 million in assets and was providing scholarships to 45 students annually. Several of the first scholarship recipients are now in law school, medical school, and graduate programs, specifically studying civil rights law, social justice, and educational equity. The Lincoln Preparatory Academy students went on to have successful lives. Darius graduated from Georgetown and is now in law school, planning to specialize in civil rights litigation. Jasmine Whitaker, who recorded the crucial video evidence, received offers from journalism schools across the country and is now studying investigative reporting. Many of the students who were there that night have become advocates for justice in their own ways. The story of what happened at the Riverside Grand Hotel on prom night is not just about one security director who let his prejudices override his professionalism. It's about the systems that enable discrimination to continue unchecked. It's about the importance of documenting injustice. And it's about the reality that Black families still have to prove they belong in spaces they have every right to occupy. Those students never asked to become symbols or test cases for civil rights. They were simply teenagers who wanted to celebrate their hard work and have a memorable prom night. But their experience became a teaching moment for the entire hospitality industry about what happens when you tolerate discrimination. Straight-A students, college-bound scholars, young people with bright futures ahead of them, and they still weren't safe from being profiled and humiliated. That reality was uncomfortable for many people to accept, but accepting it was necessary for any real change to occur. If you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember, document everything with photos and video, get witness contact information, follow up formally in writing, and don't accept dismissive responses. You're not fighting just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. Marcus Webb made a choice that evening. He saw a group of well-dressed Black teenagers and decided they looked suspicious. He thought he had the power and they had none. He thought he could humiliate them and face no consequences. He had multiple opportunities to verify the reservation, to listen to reason, to correct his mistake. He chose not to take any of them. He was wrong, and that mistake cost him everything while teaching a lesson that echoed far beyond one hotel lobby in one city. Justice isn't always swift or certain, but sometimes when brave young people stand up for themselves, when witnesses document the truth, and when people refuse to stay silent, justice does come. And that's exactly what happened here. Thank you for watching until the end. Make sure you're subscribed for more stories that matter like this one. What was the most shocking part of this story for you? Let me know in the comments below.